Batman is back at the movies. After a few years of Bat drought, we saw the all-new version of the Caped Crusader debut last year, played by Ben Affleck. You may have seen him in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, then there was that cameo in Suicide Squad, and then we'll get yet another dose of Batfleck in the upcoming Justice League movie later this year. Then, of course, there's the upcoming standalone Batman movie that's coming out sometime, we think 2019? Batman at this point is kind of a cinematic institution. The Dark Knight ushered in the modern age of the superhero movie back in the late 80s when Tim Burton rescued bats from his campy 60s TV show. And more recently, the Christopher Nolan trilogy of Bat movies set basically the gold standard for what superhero movies could be, although then we could also blame the dark and gritty DC universe on those. So yeah, Batman has a long history of appearing on screen, but did you know that Batman's movie history actually goes back way earlier than 1989, decades earlier in fact? Join us as we delve into the history of Batman at the movies. Batman's movie debut actually dates all the way back to 1943 when Columbia Pictures released a black and white film called The Batman in theaters. It was in serialized form, which means it was released in multiple parts, and it was based on the DC Comics character that had debuted just a few years earlier in 1939. The movie's storyline involves Batman, who is working for the US government, foiling the schemes of Japanese agent Dr. Daka. The movie is set, where else, in Gotham City at the height of World War II. Besides being the first appearance on film of Batman, the movie also included several details that would be part of Batman lore. That included the Batcave and its secret entrance through a grandfather clock inside Wayne Manor. The movie was pretty low budget, not all that well made. Instead of the Batmobile, which would have been expensive to create, Batman drove around in a 1939 Cadillac Series 61 convertible. Oh, and in another scene, Batman loses his cape in a fight, but it magically returns after a brief cutaway. And in a sad reflection of the World War II era when it was made, the film has a number of slurs referring to Japanese people. So if you decide to check it out, just know ahead of time that that's coming. But low budget and racism aside, the movie, which was released in 15 chapters, was a hit commercially, and it led to another serialized movie, Batman and Robin, in 1948. In that follow-up, the pair battled a hooded villain called the Wizard, whose superpower was an electrical device which controlled cars. After that, Batman went dormant for almost 2 decades, on film at least, but in the 1960s he returned to popular culture with a campy, intentionally silly TV show starring Adam West as Batman and Burt Ward as Robin. The series lasted for 3 seasons, and in 1966 it was adapted for the big screen by 20th Century Fox. It also starred West and Ward in their roles, along with Cesar Romero as the Joker, Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, Lee Merriweather as Catwoman, and Frank Gorshin as the Riddler. After that, Batman's popularity declined yet again. Starting in the late 70s though, there were renewed efforts to adapt the Caped Crusader again for the big screen. One producer, Michael Uslan, and a partner purchased the film rights to Batman from DC in 1979. It was his goal to make a darker, more serious version of the character, similar to his origins in the late 30s. But Uslan had no luck pitching a darker Batman to major studios, who wanted the movie to be more like the campy show from the 60s. Producers continued shopping Batman around, and finally Warner Brothers approved a new Batman film in the early 80s. A script called The Batman was written by Tom Mankiewicz, who had worked on James Bond films and the first Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve. The new script focused on Batman and Dick Grayson's origins, with the Joker and Rupert Thorne as villains and Silver St. Cloud as the romantic interest. Various directors were attached to the project, including Ivan Reitman, who wanted to cast Bill Murray as Batman. Sadly, for all of us, that never happened. Finally, in 1986, Tim Burton took over directing duties and the modern era of Batman began. A new screenplay was written by Sam Hamm, who would go on to write the sequel as well. For Batman, Burton cast Michael Keaton, which was a controversial choice at the time because Keaton was better known for comedy roles in movies like Beetlejuice and Mr. Mom. Jack Nicholson was cast as the Joker, but he demanded a big salary and part of the box office receipts. By some estimates, Nicholson made as much as $50 million for his role when all was said and done. The movie hit theaters in 1989 and was a huge hit, earning more than $400 million at the box office, which in the 80s was a lot more. A sequel, Batman Returns, was released in 1992 and was decidedly darker than its predecessor, which led to some complaints from parents. While the sequel, which starred Danny DeVito as Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, was a financial success, Warner Brothers was overall kind of disappointed in the box office returns. For the next movie, Batman Forever, Warner Brothers went with a new director, Joel Schumacher, while Burton stayed on as a producer. The new movie got a new Batman too, Val Kilmer. He replaced Michael Keaton, who left the franchise over disagreements about the direction of the new film. Batman Forever had a star-studded cast with Chris O'Donnell as Robin, a newly hot Jim Carrey as the Riddler, and Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face. It was released in 1995 and was a success, making $350 million, but was met with mixed reviews. Those mixed reviews, though, would get downright hostile with the next movie, Batman and Robin, 2 years later. George Clooney replaced Val Kilmer as Batman, while Chris O'Donnell returned as Robin, and new additions included Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy, and Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl. It was a financial success, making more than $238 million at the box office, but everyone despised its campy approach to the characters and the bat nipples. Dear God, the bat nipples. It's considered now to be one of the worst superhero movies of all time, which is saying something when you're talking about, Fantastic Four. After that dumpster fire, Warner Brothers scrapped plans for a sequel that was going to be titled Batman Unchained and would have featured the Scarecrow as the villain and Harley Quinn as Joker's daughter trying to avenge her father's death. Clooney, O'Donnell, and Silverstone were set to reprise their roles, and allegedly Nicolas Cage was in talks to play the Scarecrow, but the studio scrapped Batman Unchained after the terrible reception to Batman and Robin. The next few years were not really kind to the franchise, which was viewed as damaged goods after Batman and Robin. A number of other Batman productions bubbled up, but were abandoned by Warner Brothers. Those included an adaptation of the Frank Miller story arc, Batman Year One, and a Batman vs. Superman movie that had Bruce Wayne going through a mental breakdown and Clark Kent struggling after a divorce from Lois Lane. Finally, Warner Brothers hired Christopher Nolan in the early 2000s to direct a reboot called Batman Begins. You may have heard of it. The grittier take on Batman, which released in 2005, starred Christian Bale as Batman and was a huge hit, making over $372 million. And things would only get bigger from there. Two sequels, The Dark Knight, which featured Heath Ledger's now iconic Joker, and Dark Knight Rises, followed in 2008 and 2012. They were even bigger hits. Both grossed over $1 billion worldwide. The Christopher Nolan trilogy helped set the modern standard for superhero movies, especially dark and gritty realistic ones, those that have become the hallmark of DC, compared to the colorful and more lighthearted Marvel movies. That pretty much brings us up to the present era of Batman, and that means Ben Affleck, who lots of people said was one of the highlights of Batman v Superman last year. He's signed a 3-picture deal that will include the Justice League, a sequel, and a standalone movie titled, for now at least, The Batman. While Affleck initially intended to also direct the new Batman film, he since has stepped back and was replaced by new director Matt Reeves. Time will tell how good the new movies are, but so far, critics and fans have positively responded to Affleck's more mature take on the role. As you can see, Batman has a long history of appearances in film. Some have been good, some have been masterpieces, some have been god-awful, but one thing is for sure that we can all agree on: nothing will ever be as good as the animated series.